The sun had not yet risen when the radio in the small truck crackled to life. Detective Anna Begay sat very still and listened. Her hands were warm on the wheel, and her heart beat fast. For 30 years, a family had waited for an answer about a missing girl named Maria Yazzie. Her face had been on posters, on church boards, and on the fridge of 100 homes. The town had placed candles every year. People drove past the old dirt road and felt a heavy silence. Tonight, Anna's team had followed a single, tiny clue that might finally point to the truth. They got to the place and turned off the lights. The world was a blue-black blur with stars and a thin moon. Anna held a small flashlight and stepped onto the earth very carefully. Around her were people who had walked with this case for years. Tribal investigators, federal agents who had learned to listen, and local volunteers who remembered Maria's laugh. A soft wind moved the dry grass like a slow hand. Someone said the word that made everyone stop. There it is! For a moment, nothing else seemed to matter. The ground was disturbed beneath an old juniper tree. The dirt looked like it had been moved a long time ago. The team crouched and began to dig carefully. They dug with trowels and gloved hands because they did not want to break anything that could tell them who, when, and how. After a short time, they found a small object wrapped in cloth, a ribbon, faded blue, like the ribbons in the photos of Maria when she had been young. When the ribbon touched the air, it sounded like a tiny bell. A woman from the family cried softly. People held hands. The ribbon was a thread connecting years of waiting to one raw, present moment. But the most shocking part was not only that they had found the ribbon, it was what the ribbon led to. Deep in the ground, the team found a place where someone had hidden something else. It was a container, sealed, and inside were papers and a simple old toy. The papers had handwriting that matched an old notebook the investigators had once thought to be nothing. The handwriting was the name of a man who had been suspected decades ago. But the papers were new to them. The handwriting gave names and places, and the smallest of maps. That was the high point, the cliff of this story. For 30 years, people had asked, "What happened to Maria?" And tonight, the land answered in a small, steady voice. The moment the investigators looked at each other, their faces full of shock and hope, the air felt electric. But then Anna put her finger to her lips, and everyone went quiet. They had the clue, but they did not yet have the full story. That is where the cliffhanger opens. A small paper with a name could mean a man who would talk, or it could mean danger. People whispered, "Should we tell the family?" And someone answered in a hush, "Not yet. We have to make sure first." The night held its breath. We must go back to the beginning to know how a ribbon and a note could lie hidden for so long. To understand the truth, we must first understand the small, quiet things, the everyday life of a place where people remember names like family and where the land itself keeps memories. Maria was a child of the Navajo Nation. She loved to run between the houses and to feed the chickens. She had a small laugh that sounded like water in a cup. Her family, her mother, Rosie, and her brothers, knew her by the shape of her hands and the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. One evening when she was 12, she told her mother she would go to a neighbor's house to get a set of books. She left the porch and walked past the old post office. She never came back. People searched then and searched later. They looked in the arroyo, under the rock ledges, and at the edges of dry riverbeds. They asked neighbors and took notes. They asked the sheriff's office, and the case went into a file. People put up posters and prayed. Months passed, then years. The child's picture faded on the corner of the milk carton. Life kept moving, weddings, funerals, harvests, but Maria's face stayed in the corner of many hearts. Over the years, the Navajo Nation built a special team to help solve cold cases. The team was made of people who knew the land and knew the language. They were trained in modern methods, too, how to collect tiny threads of DNA, how to read old phone records, how to follow a trail that looked like nothing more than a shadow. Detective Anna Begay was one of those people. She grew up eating the same stew as Maria's family. She knew the names of the neighbors. She knew the way the wind carried voices on summer nights. But she also knew how to use a magnifying glass, how to photograph a scene, and how to call in experts to test a scrap of cloth. The team did not work alone. They joined with volunteers who remembered facts that were small but important. The color of a jacket seen on a man that night, the sound of a truck a mile away, or a faint smell at a fence. People brought in old letters, coins they had found, and the memory of someone who had moved away but had once lived near Maria's home. To build the truth, they needed many small facts stacked in the right order. The Navajo investigators believed that the land and the people carried pieces of the truth. They also believed that time could hide things, but it could not erase them. Detective Anna kept a board of notes in her tiny office. Pictures of Maria, dates, witness names, and old police reports were pinned together. She often looked at the board at night, one lamp on, the rest of the house sleeping. She thought, if the answer is here, it is hidden like a seed. We must plant our questions and wait for them to show roots. Her patience and her knowledge of the community made people trust her. Families called her when they had small thoughts. I saw a person there, or I remember an old beat-up truck. The team recorded everything. One of the small things that helped the case was new science. Years ago, investigators had not always had the tools to test a small hair, a faded ribbon, or a bit of cloth. In the 21st century, cold case teams could take a tiny scrap and check for DNA. The Navajo team learned how to collect tiny fibers without touching them, how to bag them safely, and where to send them for testing. That science would matter later in the story. Another important piece was how the team built trust in towns where people were sometimes afraid to speak. Some people feared being blamed or feared retaliation. The Navajo team offered protection and anonymity. They promised to listen. They met elders at the chapter houses, where people gathered to discuss local problems. They understood that to find the truth, they had to heal old wounds and make people feel safe to talk. Over time, whispers turned into testimony. There were also hard, low moments. Months with no progress were on Rosie and the family. The family kept Maria's room as it had been, a small bed, a folded blanket, and a picture on the wall. They sometimes told little stories about her, to keep her present. Anna visited Rosie often. They sat and drank tea and talked about small things, a song Maria used to sing or seam on a dress. Those small talks helped Anna remember why she kept working. Over the years, the team followed hundreds of small leads. One lead took them to a man who had moved to a city many miles away. He remembered seeing Maria the night she disappeared, but his memory was foggy. Another lead was a truck driver who said he had picked up a package near the old post office, but that truck driver had died years earlier. Each lead was a small stone that might or might not be part of a path. Then something new happened. A boy in town found a rusted box while digging in the garden behind an old barn. He opened it and found old coins and a ribbon. The boy gave the ribbon to his grandmother, who recognized the color and pattern. Word moved to Rosie, and this time the ribbon was tested. It was not Maria's ribbon, but it was the same make. The team put the ribbon into the cold case file and waited. Small finds like this do not always lead to answers, but they keep memory alive. Detective Anna and her team also learned how to read new kinds of maps. They studied phone towers and signal ranges. They asked for help from the lab that could test trace elements in soil and in fibers. The team mapped every small clue and drew lines from one detail to the next like a spider's web. The web looked messy at first, but then a pattern began to show. The pattern suggested that something had been moved from a small dirt road to a place where only one man traveled. The night the investigators dug under the juniper tree, Anna's team worked carefully to avoid destroying any possible evidence. They used special brushes and cameras to record every step. They sent samples to the lab and asked for the fastest possible tests. The days that followed were filled with waiting. The lab mailed a small, white envelope with a number that did not mean much to most people. But in the cold case world, a single number can mean a name. The lab phone rang. The tests were clearer than they had dared hope. The tiny fibers matched a cloth that was registered to a farm truck that had belonged to a man who had once been questioned years ago but then released. That name, the same one the old paper had hinted at, had been in the old files. He had been a suspect once, but the case had been thin. Now the clues were thicker. The team quietly checked the man's travel and repair receipts. They talked to people who had seen him near the old post office. The small things stacked until standing on them felt like walking across a bridge. As they moved, the team kept Rosie informed in gentle steps. They did not promise too much. They knew too well that hopes could be fragile. They told her only the pieces that would not make her afraid. Maria's brothers came back to town from work in the city and sat with the team. They touched the ribbon and said nothing. The family's faces showed a strange mix of fear and relief. The chapter ends on an extreme event. The team prepared to go to the man's property at dawn, the search with a warrant. They gathered evidence lists, chose a medical examiner, and loaded a truck with personnel. They knew the man might resist. They called for extra officers to keep things calm. They thought about all the worst things that could happen. They also thought about the chance that the man might finally explain and that the family would have an answer. Before they moved, Anna walked to Maria's house and stood at the porch. The morning was thin and cold. Rosie handed Anna a small cup of coffee and put her hand over Anna's. "Find my girl," she said, simply. Anna nodded. She felt the weight of that plea like a stone on her chest. The team drove toward the man's property as the sun lifted its face over the horizon. The road was a ribbon through the scrub, and the team's tires seemed loud in the quiet. They parked and stepped out. The house sat back from the road, quiet and ordinary. For a moment the world held its breath. "We stop here. When you are ready, I will continue Chapter 2 and show what the search found, how the evidence moved from clue to courtroom, and how the Navajo Nation sought justice while honoring tradition."